The scent of magnolias greeted me as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, a bittersweet perfume tangled in nostalgia and anxiety. Meadow Springs had always felt like a safe haven, a sleepy suburban neighborhood wrapped in manicured lawns and white picket fences. But the calm was deceptive. I was returning not for rest, but to care for my mother, Eleanor Davis, who had just undergone triple bypass surgery. Her once bright spirit had dimmed slightly, and the home, though filled with memories, now felt a little too quiet. As I unpacked my duffel bag in my old room, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, unchanged since I was a boy. On the dresser, a photo of me as a child grinning beside my mother in our blooming rose garden reminded me why I had come back. I had no idea that garden would soon be the battleground for a war I never wanted, a war I'd be forced to fight. The very next morning, a sharp, impatient knock rattled the front door. I opened it to a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a suburban catalog. Perfectly pressed blouse, bleached curls, French manicured nails, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. "You must be Eleanor's son," she said, with a smile that couldn't hide the frost in her eyes. "I'm Diane Winters, president of the Meadow Springs Homeowners Association." Her name rang a distant bell from my mom's stories, always accompanied by rolls and sighs. "I wanted to welcome you home," Diane continued, "and also discuss some pressing issues." "What kind of issues?" I asked, stepping outside and shutting the door behind me so Mom wouldn't be disturbed. Diane flipped through her clipboard with theatrical precision. "Violation notices. The rose garden extends 8.5 inches beyond the property line. Your mailbox is painted an unauthorized color, sunset orange instead of HOA-approved rustic terracotta, and the oak tree branches hang too low over the sidewalk." I almost laughed. My mother just had open-heart surgery. Surely this can wait. "Rules exist for a reason," she replied, clicking her pen with mechanical rhythm. "You have 7 days to comply, or daily fines will begin accruing." She pivoted with military precision and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement like gunshots. I stood stunned on the porch as our neighbor, Frank Wilson, waved sympathetically from across the street. That evening, he dropped off a casserole and a warning. "You got a storm coming, kid," he said in a hushed voice. "Diane doesn't run an HOA. She runs a dictatorship." I stayed up late that night digging through HOA regulations and state property laws, trying to make sense of what Diane had thrown at me. What I found only made my blood boil. Half the violations she listed weren't even enforceable. Worse, there was a pattern. Obscure fines used as weapons against homeowners until they either caved or moved out. One case stood out: the Patels. Their daughter used a wheelchair, and the HOA had fined them over and over for a ramp that didn't match the aesthetic guidelines. They eventually sold their house and moved away in quiet disgrace. Frank hadn't been exaggerating. This wasn't management. It was extortion. The next morning, I dug through my mom's old files until I found the official property survey. According to it, her garden was perfectly within bounds. Just to be sure, I walked the perimeter and double-checked the measurements myself. I was remeasuring the last flower bed when Diane's silver Mercedes pulled up again. This time, she wasn't alone. A tall, balding man with expensive loafers stepped out beside her. "This is Gregory Palmer, our HOA's legal counsel," she announced with a smirk. "We're here to document continued violations." I held up the survey. According to this official survey, the garden is on our property. Palmer barely glanced at it. "That's outdated. The HOA commissioned a new survey last year." "Without notifying the homeowner? That's illegal." I snapped. "I'm a civil engineer. I know property boundaries." Something flickered across Diane's face. Surprise, maybe even respect, before she masked it with smug disinterest. "Nevertheless," she said, "you still have unaddressed violations." It was then I realized this wasn't about flowers or paint. It was about power. Over the next few days, I complied with the petty demands, repainted the mailbox, trimmed the tree, not because they were valid, but because Mom didn't need more stress. But the neighborhood's tension simmered beneath every interaction. People waved from behind curtains. Conversations died when I approached, and it felt like every smile hid a secret. I started to feel like I was being watched, a paranoid thought I told myself, until it wasn't. Frank returned for another quiet chat. They're not just trying to bully you, he said, lowering his voice again. They want that property. You're on the corner lot. Prime real estate for whatever scheme they're cooking up. Later that night, he introduced me to Sarah Jang, a former HOA board member who had abruptly resigned 6 months earlier. They pressured me to approve outrageous fines and fraudulent expenses, she confessed. When I refused, they turned on me. Your mother's property is the last major holdout. They need it badly. For what? Sarah hesitated. Not here. Meet me tomorrow. The library. I'll show you everything. That night, as I locked at the house, I noticed the front door's deadbolt felt loose, as if it had been tampered with. And for the first time, I wondered, how far would they go? The next morning, I drove to the library, a growing sense of dread curling in my gut. Sarah was already waiting in a quiet corner, clutching a manila folder stuffed with papers. They're planning a rezoning deal, she said without preamble. A commercial development, shopping centers, parking lots. The whole neighborhood is in play. Apex Development is behind it. Diane's husband is one of their top executives. She spread out blueprints and city planning documents across the table. Corner lots are critical. Yours, especially. Without it, the entire plan collapses. I stare at the maps, stunned. So this entire campaign, the fines, the inspections, it's all just pressure tactics? They're not just trying to force you out, Sarah said grimly. They're trying to financially crush you. And if that doesn't work, they'll try something worse. As we left the library, I noticed a black SUV trailing us. Tinted windows, no plates. Sarah's face turned pale. They've followed me before, she whispered. Be careful. When I got home, Mom was sitting on the porch, staring silently at her ruined flower bed. The roses, the same ones she planted the year I was born, were gone, torn up by contractors while we were at the meeting. But it was what was left behind that sent a chill up my spine. Evenly spaced mounds of soil with faint outlines of buried objects beneath. Drainage improvements, Diane had claimed, smugly, but my instinct screamed otherwise. Something was buried in our yard, and it wasn't just pipes. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept staring out the window at those strange mounds in the soil, perfectly spaced, unnaturally symmetrical. Every instinct I had told me something was wrong, something beyond the realm of community, disputes, and HOA nonsense. The next morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. A bulldozer rumbled into our yard, accompanied by a crew of workers in high-visibility vests. Standing tall in the middle of it all, like a general overseeing a battlefield, was Diane Winters, arms folded, a smug smile glued to her face. I stormed outside. What the hell are you doing? Implementing drainage corrections as outlined in your violation notice, she replied, handing me a document. You're trespassing. Page 12, paragraph 7 of the HOA agreement, she said. Your mother signed it when she bought the property. It gives us access rights after the grace period expires. I glanced over the document. The clause was real, but grossly misapplied. Still, it gave them just enough legal cover to keep the cops from intervening. I called Officer Martinez, hoping for backup. He arrived 20 minutes later, reviewed the paperwork, then sighed. Technically, they're within their authority, he said with an apologetic shrug. It's a civil matter. I stood helplessly as workers dismantled what remained of my mother's rose garden. But what disturbed me wasn't just the destruction, it was what they were burying. Strange metal cylinders, long and narrow, nestled into each hole before being quickly covered in soil. Drainage improvements, Diane repeated, her voice syrupy and fake. But I'd seen enough trench layouts during my engineering career to know those weren't for drainage. They were setting something up. That evening, Mom sat on the porch, holding one of her uprooted roses in her lap, like a lost pet. The silence between us was heavy, only broken by the occasional chirp of cicadas and the rustle of the oak tree above us. I don't like the way the soil looks, she said quietly, staring at the garden bed. It's off. It's not the same. I rose and walked to the flower bed. The soil had a different texture, looser, more granular. And then I saw it. A glint of silver wire, almost invisible beneath the dirt, snaking along the edge of the mound. My stomach dropped. "Mom, don't move," I said, my voice tight. She looked at me, alarmed. "What is it?" I crouched low, careful not to touch anything, and snapped a photo of the wire. Then I called Officer Martinez again, this time keeping my voice deliberately calm. "I need you to come back. Now. There's something suspicious buried on our property." Within the hour, not just Martinez, but a second officer, a grizzled man with a war-hardened demeanor named Sergeant Reynolds, arrived. When I showed them the wire, Reynolds knelt, examined it without touching, then stood abruptly. "Get back. Now. Call the bomb squad. Evacuate the houses on both sides." "Bomb squad." I repeated, my throat tightening. "That's a trigger wire," Reynolds said grimly. "That's not for drainage. That's military grade." The next 2 hours felt like a surreal fever dream. Yellow tape, flashing lights, armored vehicles, neighbors whispering behind fences. Men in bomb suits slowly unearthed each mound with surgical precision. The technician who approached our porch afterward looked like he'd aged 10 years in the process. "M14 anti-personnel mines," he said. "Military surplus. Not something a civilian should have access to. Each one has a kill radius of 15 feet. Mom gasped, covering her mouth. They were planted methodically, intentionally. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. I looked at Reynolds. "This is attempted murder." "You're damn right it is," he said. "And now it's a criminal case." That's when Detective Wynne showed up. She was sharp-eyed and calm, the kind of person you'd want in your corner during a war, which by now was exactly what this had become. I told her everything. The harassment, the trespassing, the development plans, the library meeting, the strange SUV. "Any security cameras?" she asked. "No," I said, "but Frank Wilson across the street has a system." "Let's go." Frank welcomed us into his cluttered home office. His camera feed, a 24/7 setup, had caught everything. Workers digging under Diane's watchful eye, Palmer directing from the background, and then the footage from 3 nights earlier sealed their fate. For people in dark clothing, caught red-handed on infrared, Diane Winters, Gregory Palmer, and 2 unidentified men, carrying duffel bags and planting objects along our yard at 2:17 a.m. "That's your smoking gun," Wynne said. "They're going down." Military landmines for a property dispute? I asked aloud, trying to comprehend the madness. "Who does that?" "People who don't want to leave anything to chance," she replied. Within hours, warrants were issued. Palmer and Diane were arrested in their homes. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Back off. Next time, your mother won't be so lucky." Wynne took my phone, logged the threat, and placed a patrol car in front of our house. But I still barely slept, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak and whisper in the shadows. They'd buried bombs in our yard. Who knew what they were capable of next? The next morning, Wynne returned, holding a grim expression and a file folder. "We searched Palmer's office," she said. "You're going to want to see this." Inside were maps and documents, not just for our home, but for 6 other properties on our street. Each one had been marked for persuasion tactics. Each one had resisted Apex Development's buyout offer. "This isn't an isolated incident," Wynne said. "It's organized, systemic, coordinated intimidation. And Apex." I asked. "Palmer's firm is on Apex's payroll. So is Diane's husband. We're pulling threads, but there's a lot to unravel." Before she could say more, an officer rushed in. Kyle Winters just tried to enter the evidence locker. He had a detonator on him. I froze. They were going to set them off? I asked, horror crawling up my spine. "Looks that way," she said. "Mom's morning walk, checking the mailbox, watering the lawn." It could have ended in a bloodbath. I stood at the kitchen window, staring at the garden, now cordoned off as a crime scene, wondering what else might be hidden beneath that soil, and how deep the conspiracy truly went. I hadn't even had time to sit down when the next wave of retaliation hit. That night, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Next time, your mother won't survive the accident. Officer Wynn read it over my shoulder. They're escalating. Fast. We doubled the patrols around the house. Officers kept watch in rotating shifts. I moved Mom's bed into the downstairs guest room, close to the back exit and easier to evacuate if needed, but it still wasn't enough to ease the gnawing anxiety. At 3 a.m., the landline rang. Your house is on fire. I sprinted to Mom's room, heart pounding, only to find her fast asleep. No smoke, no fire. Just another scare tactic. Another sadistic mind game. By morning, she was pale, trembling. Maybe I should have sold, she whispered. Maybe it wasn't worth all this. No, I said, gripping her hand. You didn't start this, but we're going to finish it. Later that afternoon, when returned with a file, we traced the threat texts. One came from a burner phone bought by Kyle Winters. Another was sent from a prepaid device purchased by Tom Henderson, Apex's lead project manager. And the mines, I asked, military grade, black market origin. We're involving the FBI now. But the deeper we dig, the more rot we're finding. She paused, then pulled out an image from the search of Palmer's office, a meeting photo showing Diane Winters, Palmer, and Apex executives, with James Mercer, the CEO, seated at the head of the table. This goes to the top. 3 days later, a knock came at our door, not from officers, but from a man in a tailored suit. His smile was smooth. His eyes weren't. Mr. Davis, he said, extending a business card. James Mercer, Apex Development. I didn't shake his hand. I hear your mother isn't well, he said, casually strolling around my porch like he owned it. Hospitals are unpredictable. Medications get mixed up. Accidents happen. My jaw clenched. Get off our property. He leaned in slightly, voice cold. Sign over your mother's lot, or things escalate. I pressed the panic button Wynn had given me. Officers swarmed the property within minutes. But Mercer was already gone. That evening, a nurse at Mom's clinic flagged something alarming. Unprescribed medication showing up in her blood test results. Someone had tried to poison her. That was the last straw. I called Wynn. I'm done playing defense. We needed proof, undeniable, indisputable. That's when I remembered the old gardening camera my mother had hidden in her birdhouse, filming her roses for a time-lapse project. She never took it down. I logged into the cloud backup and scrubbed through the footage. There was a figure in a suit, supervising as the devices were buried. James Mercer, smirking, giving orders. Wynn nearly leaped from her seat when she saw the footage. We've got him. The FBI moved within hours. Dawn broke to the sound of helicopters and sirens. FBI agents flooded Meadow Springs and Apex's headquarters. Mercer was arrested at his estate. Diane and Tom Henderson were pulled from their homes in handcuffs. Several HOA members fled, but were caught. 3 judges and 6 police officers with Apex ties were taken down with them. The biggest shock came when District Attorney Walsh was arrested, accused of accepting bribes to suppress prior complaints. News vans circled the block. Headlines exploded. Military landmines used an HOA harassment scheme. FBI uncovers national real estate fraud ring. Neighbors who had once stared from behind curtains now stepped outside, shaken, but no longer silent. One by one, they began to speak out. Mrs. Patel tearfully told reporters about being fined for Diwali decorations. The Johnsons revealed how sudden special assessments nearly cost them their retirement home. Every story added another thread to the tapestry of truth. That evening, Sarah Jang visited with a casserole and a stack of court documents. The class action lawsuit is underway. Over 60 families statewide are joining. You were the first to stand up. Now we all will. I looked around at our battered porch, at the flower bed lined with crime scene flags, and realized this was no longer just about us. It never was. 2 weeks later, a town hall was called, this time by the residents, not the HOA. With Diane and her board gone, neighbors gathered at the community center, this time with hope instead of fear. Frank Wilson moderated the emergency election. No longer a formality. This was real democracy in action. I proposed dissolving the HOA, Sarah said, stepping up to the podium. Let's create a neighborhood council with term limits, full transparency, and no enforcement power over our homes. The motion passed unanimously. Frank was elected chair. Sarah took on Treasury duties again, this time with a watchdog committee auditing every transaction. And when they asked if I wanted a role, I declined. My mom would like to head the gardening committee, I said, smiling at her beside me. Applause erupted. She blushed, wiping her eyes. As spring arrived, her roses bloomed again. Cuttings shared freely with neighbors instead of warnings. The colors stretched slightly beyond our property line. Nobody complained. They asked for some, too. The federal trial began in late spring. Mercer and his co-conspirators were charged with racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, real estate fraud, and weapons trafficking. The court played the birdhouse footage on a massive screen. The jury barely needed deliberation. Mercer was sentenced to 35 years without parole. Diane got 25. Others followed, one by one. When called me afterward, we've traced their model across 5 other states. Your case broke the dam. And then came the final twist. A call from the Geological Survey Office confirmed it. Beneath our property sat a vast natural aquifer, worth tens of millions to water bottling companies. Apex had never planned a shopping center. They wanted the water. All that blood, destruction, and trauma over groundwater. When I told my mother, she laughed until she cried. They could have just asked nicely, she said, patting the soil around her new rose cutting. I would have let them drill a well. That summer, we hosted a neighborhood cookout, the first in over a decade. Children played in the yard where landmines had once been buried. Neighbors toasted lemonade and shared stories that had once lived only in whispers. Sarah stood to raise her glass. To new beginnings, she said. I looked around at our vibrant, living neighborhood, not controlled, not fearful, free, and I realized sometimes to protect what matters most, you have to dig deep. You have to stand firm, even when the ground shakes beneath you, because peace is not just the absence of conflict. It's the presence of courage.